Welcome back to Introduction to Programming. This is video 19 in our series. My name is John Duane. In the last video, we began our coverage of file input-output by seeing how to write code to open and close an Excel workbook file. We used the macro recorder to get us started, and then saw where we could insert custom code to accomplish the goals of our program. Today we start talking about text files. Since this video series has an emphasis on Excel macros, I will admit there is a bias here towards programming in a business environment. I work in the financial services industry, and I will tell you that our developers prefer to import structured data, that is, data from databases. You almost always know what you're going to get when you connect to a database in terms of record layout and what the data is going to look like. Unfortunately, we cannot always get structured data. Often all we can get is a CSV file or a TXT file. So then we have to deal with unstructured data, and it's in these text files. So that's a completely different thing, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Alright, so first of all, the developer, you, has to become very familiar with the text file that will be read into the program. There are lots of questions that have to be answered before writing the first line of code. How are the fields separated from each other? Is the file comma delimited or fixed column width? Are all the rows the same? That is, do they have the same fields? For example, are there column headings in row 1 and data in all the rows that follow? Is there a footer row that may have a record count but no data? If one or more of the fields in a file has numbers and the program has to do some math on those numbers, how are those numbers formatted? Do they have commas and dollar signs? If so, you'll have to plan on converting those numbers from string format to a numeric format. If the program you're writing will be used on a regular basis to automate some process, will the file look the same every time, every day? If not, are the differences predictable and consistent? Okay, so how do you gain this familiarity? Well, how do you get this close-up look at your text file? Well, you're going to need a good text editing tool. Now, you can open your text file in Excel or Word and see the contents, but that's not a great approach because those programs change the data to fit the interface. For example, if you open a text file in Excel, it will drop leading zeros on numbers, and sometimes that's disastrous. So I recommend a tool that will not change anything and let you see everything. Now, there are plenty of free text editors available on the web. The one I like is called NotePad++. So here's where you can get it. Like I said, it's free, and more importantly, it works great. So let's take a look. So here's Notepad++ with there's 4 files that are open at the moment. This one that's being displayed is a CSV file. There's a fixed column width file. Here's a file that actually has some computer code in it. Some of this may look familiar. And then here's another CSV file. This is our zip code database, and this is, see, comma delimited. So you can see the data very clearly. Another thing I love about this is there are line numbers. That's very handy. At the bottom there are some indicators of how many lines are in the file. That's nice, 54. One thing I really like, and this is especially useful in fixed column width files, is down here the column, see, COL:27, that tells me that my cursor is in column 27 right now. Let's click over here. Now I'm in column 23. When you're sizing up a fixed column width file, it's very important to find out where do the fields begin and end, and that's expressed in terms of column position. So all across this file are columns. So at the very beginning, I'm in column 1, and you can see that here at the bottom. And as I arrow over, you can see the column number changing. So this is very, very handy when you're trying to kind of get the specs on a fixed column width file. Another thing I really like is in the view menu, there's a way to display control characters in the file, and the most important ones for me are the end of line characters. So we'll click this, show end of line, and look at that. There's our typical DOS end of line character, a CR, which is a carriage return, and an LF, which is a line feed. That's very handy. So you can turn that on and off depending on what your needs are at the moment. So love that. So you got to get NotePad++ or something like it so you can really see what's going on inside your text files. Okay, so what we're going to do now is look at a simple function that opens a text file and counts the number of lines or rows in the file. We'll use this function to determine at runtime how many rows are in the file so that we can properly size an array that will hold the data in the file. So this is a really good example of how to open a text file and read its comments. So let's take a look at that code that's already written in. Here it is. So we're looking at this function here. So again, it's a function, so it takes an argument and returns a value. In this case, it's going to return a long integer, something bigger than, well, it has the capacity to be bigger than 32,767, which would be a regular integer. So the function is called lines, and down in this section we are actually opening the file, we're doing something, and we're closing the file. But let's go through it line by line. We're declaring an integer called int file. This is going to be the file handle. The operating system can handle multiple files being opened at the same time, but it needs to be supplied with a number identifier for each file, and that's called the file handle. And in Visual Basic we do that in a way that I'm going to demonstrate in just a second. So we create a variable which will hold the file handle, which will be a number. Next we have this string variable which will sort of serve as a buffer to hold the data that we're reading from the file. We establish the lines function with a starting value of 0. Now here, the int file variable that I described a second ago, we're using this function freefile. This will assign to int file the next available file handle number. Now if there's only going to be one file open, it's going to be a 1. But if there's multiple files open, it could be 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever is needed. So freefile puts the number into int file, and that'll be our file handle. And then we go into the actual opening of the file with this expression here. Open str file, that's the name of the file that was passed in as the argument. So open, and this will be a fully qualified file name with drive, folders, and file name with extension. So open string file for input, because we're going to read the file. So that's an important keyword, input, as int file, and this as with int file at the end, this is the file handle number, and we'll have to use this several times during the during this little code snippet. Once the file is open, we will loop through the file line by line, and the way we do that is with a do until loop. So we're going to do until EOF in file. So what this means is end of file for this file handle. So it'll go all the way to the last row. So on the first row, what it does is line input. This will read that entire row and put the contents of that row into our buffer variable str data. Again, see, we're using the file handle here. So line input, that'll give us the whole row. If we just use input, that would just give us the first field or the first character. So we don't want to do that. We want the entire row. And then we'll increment lines by 1. So lines equals lines plus 1. Initially it's 0. So after the first time through, lines will be 1. But by the time we finish, it ought to be around 52. And we just do that again and again and again until we're at the end of the file. And then once we are at the end of the file, the loop ends, and then we hit this expression, close in file, which does what it looks like it's doing. It closes the file. And then we're at the end of the function. So when we hit this, the function returns the value of lines to the calling program. And that calling program is up above here. We won't talk about this today. This will be in the next video. But just to give you a little preview, this the next video is going to take our census file, which is comma delimited, read it into an array with this code here, and then write it back out as a fixed column width file with this code. So that'll be an interesting demonstration of how to read and write comma delimited and fixed column width files. So that'll be for next time. But I want to point out that this lines function is used in this program right here to redimension this array with the proper number of rows. So very handy. As you recall from our discussion of arrays, we need to tell the operating system ahead of time how many elements the array is going to have ahead of time so it can allocate memory. And if you want to be dynamic, you need to do that at runtime, and so this function is really good for that. So that'll be for next time. We'll go into this in more detail. So let's wrap up. Today we began our discussion of text file input and output. We talked about the questions you have to answer before writing any code, and you saw my favorite text editor, NotePad++. Next time we'll continue with the example that I just gave you a preview of there. It's more complex than what we've done so far, where we'll be reading from our census text file into an array and then write the data out to a new text file. So that's it for today. I hope this was helpful. Please subscribe to this video series and write comments about anything that was not clear. I do monitor the comments, and I will definitely respond. So we'll see you next time.